myth of androgyny, wholeness, or completion. Now, Plato mentions in a passage about this creation of Zeus, and he creates this round ball of life. And he finds that the ball is constantly complaining, and that at that time when Zeus cuts the ball into two, and in the process, the notion of longing and desire is created, and all that the two pieces can do is to wish for completion. So in that sense, Zeus creates male and female organs and sets the ball rolling as far as the world is concerned. But Plato's ideas about what he's talking about androgyny is largely impossible, in the sense gender differentiation and genetic differentiation does not allow androgyny. So when we talk about alienation within the subject, the moment of being conceived, that alienation is largely due to the impossibility of androgyny, in the sense at the moment of being conceived, subjects are not allowed any choice in their choice of gender. I cannot choose to be born a female or a male. This creates, according to Jacques Lacan, a system of alienation. And this is an alienation which is the real lack, in the sense it's not a cultural lack. It's a real lack. It's an unavoidable lack. And it's a lack that will put a major blot into the unconscious of the subject. Coming to the real lack, sexuality, and the need for gratification, we need to understand gratification as a sense of fulfillment which a complete subject desires. So desire brings in gratification or joy source. So gratification can be identified as joy or joy source. Now we know that the lack of androgyny is traumatic for a subject because everything within civilizational culture is defined within the male or the female and the possible reunion between the two. So if you talk about India, you have this entire notion, concept of the Ardhanarishwari. And if we examine the Chinese, they have this notion and the idea of the yin and the yang, and there's this constant give and take and interplay between the two genders in that sense. So this lack of androgyny is traumatic, and this leads, and the real lack leads a subject to fulfill or supplement the lack that he has faced through heterosexual unions, in the sense relationships. So when we talk about the imaginary order, Lacan talks about how a subject interacts with the environment. Now the realization of this interaction with the environment takes place through the senses, and senses are constantly recording binary oppositions. Now how do we look at binary oppositions? Every moment you are constructing the reality you're seeing, and you're constructing reality through your senses, through sight, through the oral mode, or through the vocal mode. And in the process of creating ideas of reality around you, you do tend to wonder, how would an infant look at reality? An infant at the age of anywhere between an hour to 18 months would be dependent on certain sensory notions like the smell of the mother, the heat and the cold. So an infant is constantly exposed to the notion of sensory stimuli by which the infant reacts in a very limited way with reality around it. The third thing we're talking about is the mirror stage. Now this mirror stage occurs between 6 to 18 months, and the mirror stage is a cultural identification. We're talking about the mirror as a cultural identification. As we know, an infant normally lacks motor neuron control. And because the infant lacks motor neuron control, it's very, very difficult for the infant subject to manage. Culturally speaking, the infant looks at the world around itself and begins constructing an idea, a notion of what it's like. Also, the structuring of the drives through parental care is very, very important in the construction and the channelizing of the ego. But we must understand that the mirror that the infant is working with is actually a meconnaissance. Because it lacks motor neural control, the infant would see itself as whole, but might not be whole, remember, because the child still cannot walk. So the cultural mirror constantly refers back to the subject as a source of identification. And marked by this lack, the subject would codify certain sources that it has seen within the mirror stage. This mirror would talk about the experience and the trauma of birth, the early identifications, subjectivity, and desire. The imaginary order and the prelinguistic development of the infant is when the infant uses indexical identification, in the sense it cannot speak, so it's still in a prelinguistic development, so that infants would be pointing most of the time. Articulation does not occur, but there would be definitely cultural identification that occur through senses like the color, smell, sound, and temperature. So we're talking about indexical identifications. When they are attached to the first speech sound uttered by the infant, we would term that as a unary signifier. Now we know that the unary signifier does not refer to any object. This is still not the beginning of language, because a language needs reporting or referring back, and it's only when there's reporting or referring back can the structure bring out meaning. But something quite revolutionary about what Lacan mentioned was that the unconscious is structured as language. In this sense, the baby's, the infant's unconscious being unstructured starts getting structured through language, and in a way the mirror stage identifications construct the unconscious. The moment the infant enters language structures, then and is caught into the linguistic symbol of kinships, terms like father, mother, brother, and sister, then comes the idea of the phallus, where the phallus are the privileges of patriarchy. In that sense, psychoanalysis is hugely patriarchal. Now, within the Oedipus complex, it's impossible for any subject to participate within the phallus of the father. So, as a result, he experiences a symbolic castration by giving up desire, which is what Lacan terms as a barred subject. This leads to new kinship patterns happening. Thank you very much. This was a brief overview of what I had done in trying to understand a few basic concepts within critical theory. In a way, I tried to explain basic ideas of structuralism, deconstruction, and basic Lacanian psychoanalysis. Now, this is a basic introduction, and there are certain ideas and concepts that need to be explored by you all ahead. Thank you very much.